Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this ICW event hosted by BSI in partnership with the ICW and the ABHI. Today, you'll be hearing from a variety of different speakers. We've got Claire Ward, who you can see on your screen from the ICW, Courtney Salisbury from BSI, Richard Phillips from ABHI, Paul Tad with a case study, and Andrew Dixon from SGVC. There's going to be a very full-packed agenda for you today, and they'll be discussing collaboration in the healthcare sector with an opportunity for a discussion afterwards. My name is Rebecca Constable, and I'm here today to help facilitate the webinar. I'm also delighted to have my colleague Wahida on the line, who'll be running the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Just before we begin, I wanted to make you aware that you've joined the webinar in a mute-only mode, so you can't talk to each other or to us. During the session, please feel free to type your questions in the question box in your webinar control panel, and we'll do our best to answer them in the Q&A section at the end of the conference. I know some of you already submitted them through registration. For the questions, for the discussion, please just put your questions in the box and we'll come to you directly. Just to let you know, you'll be receiving a recording of the webinar along with a copy of the slides after the session today. And at the very end of the webinar, we'll run a survey to ask you what you thought of the event and what you'd like to hear from in future webinars. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and thanks again to BSI for their support for this event. I'm also delighted that we're working with ABHI on this, and I know that there'll be a number of ABHI members as well as ICW members and beyond who will be here today. So I wanted to just give you a quick introduction to the ICW, and Courtney, thank you very much for running the slides. If I could have the next slide, please. So our vision and aims at the ICW support people, organisations and business to understand the value of collaboration and the benefits achieved through collaborative working. We recently, in the last year or so, refreshed those aims, recognising that so many public sector organisations are involved and in the collaborative working, and particularly in healthcare. And we'll be going on to talk a little bit more about that. But for those of you who are in the healthcare sector, you will know that with the legislation going through Parliament at the moment, there's a great emphasis on collaboration within the NHS and across the rest of procurement. So next slide, please. Just to give you some background to the Institute, we're 30 years old. We were originally formed by the CBI and what was then the DTI. And our role was to assist organisations to develop collaborative relationships on a competitive basis. We do provide support to develop and share and promote best practice. And we're a self-financing, not-for-profit membership organisation of both individuals and of corporate and organisations as well. So our executive network has over 90 plus members in it across a range of different industries and sectors, with government and academia too. Next slide, please. As you'll see from this map, we've got evolving links across the world as well, to some extent driven by the international standard ISO 44001. Last week we had the official launch of ICW Australia, and we're delighted that there's growing interest across the world in evolving a version of the ICW and the work that we do in other parts. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of the things that we do and how we work, we have a number of different special interest groups. We work across different sectors, and we are influenced by our ambassadors, who are those companies who have been with us really from the start of ICW and helping us to shape, along with an elected advisory council, supported of course by the ICW main board. And as you will see from the next slide, we have a really diverse range of companies, multinational companies in many cases, across defence, infrastructure, construction, and transport as well, to name just a few of those sectors. Some of those members, I'm conscious, will also be members of ABHI, where they're working in the technology sector. Next slide, please. So we have a range of activities at the ICW, as you will see on this slide, from professional development, a number of our events, developing a community of practice and learning from each other about collaborative working. of which, of course, we have a number of publications and research and tools and guides to support our members. As you'll see from the next slide, there's been an evolution of ICW's thought leadership, which started from the model developed with our members and understanding of a structured collaborative working, which was taken through into ultimately the international standard ISO 44001. And in the next slide, you'll see that that thought leadership continues to be developed with our members through our special interest group. In the next slide, you'll see again another one of our publications which sets out the value and benefits that are derived from being a member of the ICW, working together across the corporate members, but also with government departments, associations and academia. And we also support, as you'll see in our next slide, the professional development of individuals, helping them to build the skills in behaviour and cultures for collaboration. And that is something which allows members to be associate members, to qualify as MICW, and those who continue that professional development and commitment to the ICW are also eligible to apply for fellowship. You'll see in the next slide the range of special interest groups, and you'll hear from one of our special interest group leaders today, Andrew Dixon, who is lead for the Small and Medium Enterprises Special Interest Group. And we encourage those special interest groups to share and to learn from each other across the membership. And as you'll see in the next slide, we have a whole programme of activities across Share and Learn. Those are primarily for our members, and the webinars that we host are, of course, a public event. Again, on the next slide, you'll see some of the other work that we do with ICW courses and workshop, and I would encourage you to visit our website for more information on the courses, the workshops, and the research and case studies set out in the next slide. I hope that that's been an interesting and rather brief introduction to the work that we do at the ICW, and we're delighted to be working in this sector to encourage interest in healthcare. And I'd now like to move on to thank all of you for participating today.
So Courtney is our Senior Development Director, part of our Global Healthcare Leadership Team. Over to you, Courtney.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Claire. And BSI, British Standards Institution, is proud to be here with ICW and ABHI to talk about how we can really take the lessons learned from potentially other sectors and how they've driven collaboration and bring it to the healthcare sector and understand how formal frameworks can really establish better business relationships and ultimately better collaboration. So BSI is a global organization despite British Standards Institution in the name. We have offices in over 70 countries across the globe, have a number of different streamlines and services that we provide around developing standards as the national standards body for the United Kingdom, but also deliver global assurance and training type of audit and certification services to assure against those standards that we create, and also capacity building and training around that to build competency around the standards criteria. So a wide variety of different service streams, including as well consulting or as the notified body within the healthcare sector for medical devices. We're trusted from the regulator to actually assure quality and safety in the medical device field. So a wide range, again, of different services that BSI provides. But again, in this context, what we're trying to determine is how we can really leverage some of these best practice standards, management system frameworks, and apply it to how to better collaborate within the healthcare sector. So first, I'm going to talk about a story that's probably made all the news and you've heard about over and over, a recent success story off the back of the pandemic. I find that people collaborate when they must collaborate, and what we're trying to do is talk about how we can not just collaborate in the face of a pandemic and a human pandemic crisis, but actually how can we bring formal collaboration to the healthcare sector in a more formalized and consistent and scaled way. So as you probably are aware, but also just to re-emphasize, the collaboration between the academia sector, or the University of Oxford, and the commercial private sector of AstraZeneca and the pharmaceutical industry really collaborated and combined forces to develop and ultimately scale the manufacturing and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccine. The collaboration between academia and industry is established in some parts of the world. However, the speed and the scale of the achievement that was achieved during the pandemic around the vaccine is unprecedented. So again, what we're talking about here is there's pockets of great collaboration that happens, but the speed with which the vaccine was created and the scale with which it reached in a global audience is unprecedented, and a true sign of what collaboration can achieve once you remove some of the barriers. Another key element, I would say, was the joint commitment between the two parties. So one of the elements of 44,001 that Claire references, this understanding of the strategic objective of a business relationship, and really understanding what does that joint commitment look like? What are those strategic objectives that the two businesses want to achieve? In this case, it was to provide a vaccine for a not-for-profit basis for the duration of the pandemic. So imagine the commitment that had to be made by both parties to do it for not-for-profit and also unlimited duration as the initiation of their partnership and their collaboration. As I'm sure you read, there's been many ups and downs, hardships over media scrutiny, things like ownership of data and IP. Those are common barriers that organizations face when they're talking about collaborating more formally. But these two entities were able to overcome and successfully launch and then manufacture and distribute at scale the vaccine. So these type of collaborations must continue beyond the pandemic and occur when it's not a crisis. But they have to be done outside of just goodwill. It's alongside of, but not just in hearts and minds and handshakes, but actually through a formal version of collaboration and a formal mechanism to achieve collaboration. So off the back of that success story, we've been really, as ABHI, ICW, and BSI, really looking at the collaboration opportunity, I would say, within the recently released NHS England strategy about integrated care systems and the aspirations that the ICS strategy has across NHS in England. So on the screen here, you can see a number of different screenshots and from the long-term strategy for ICS that have been taken. And throughout the whole strategy document, there are a number of references as the mechanism to achieve integrated care. To make sure that the patient achieves the best type of care from the NHS, it requires collaboration. And I'll read just a few quotes that I've pulled out from the strategy document. NHS improvement will take a more proactive role in supporting collaborative approaches between trusts. So right now they're operating quite siloed as trusts. How do we develop a collaborative approach between trusts? How do we make sure, second quote, service integration can be delivered locally through collaborative arrangements between different providers or trusts in an alliance type contract? So what do those collaborative arrangements look like? What does that mean? How do you formulate them with collaborative business relationships? Longer term NHS contracts with all providers include a clear requirement to collaborate in support of system objectives. Claire referenced procurement and her speech just now around how do you actually make sure that there are clear requirements inscribed in future contracts with providers to the NHS that require this collaboration mindset and this collaboration formality to achieve this integrated care strategy that they've laid out. Again, how do you support ICS delivery? There will be a new operating model based on the principles of co-design and collaboration. What are those principles of collaboration, I ask the NHS England and this ICS strategy? What principles of collaboration are we looking to use as a basis to formally integrate the care system model that they're looking to achieve? That's the challenge the NHS has on their hands right now. You can see that on the table here on the right-hand side, doctors very much view the need for integration of primary and secondary care. And one of the things that they see as the most highest driver, and that's 94%, is that collaboration between primary and secondary care doctors will improve the quality of patient services and experience. So NHS has done their research to understand that actually collaboration drives better quality within patient services and patient experience. So the challenge that NHS now has is, how do we collaborate? So the question we have for the audience and for the healthcare sector as an example is, how do we take the collaboration relationship management standards, the series ISO 44000, as a mechanism to determine the capability of trust or providers within a single area or single region, or the competency of the individuals within trust and providers to actually collaborate? Because collaborate is much bigger than just a formal handshake. It really needs to be a formal mechanism. So the last slide I have here is just to talk about a potential model of how we could take the collaboration principles and apply it to this NHS ICS strategy. It's through a maturity assessment based on the international standard that's been created as an ISO 44000, Collaborative Business Relationship Management. The principles, you can see a few snapshot examples on the left-hand side here around relationship management, vision and values, business objectives, collaborative leadership, governance and processes. Can you imagine if we benchmarked each individual trust and what their capability is to manage relationships, to really define business objectives, to have leadership that is collaborative? If we benchmarked each of the trusts and their capabilities to collaborate, we then would have a kind of a scoring system that would show, here are the trusts or the providers that are more already able and competent to collaborate. Let's focus on getting them to collaborate around primary and secondary care first, while we build up the competency and capability of other trusts or providers that maybe are less familiar with formal collaboration and the ISO 44000 standards. So the message that we're saying here is, and you'll see it through Richard's upcoming example, is that collaboration can be done formally and it can be applied to specific strategies within the healthcare sector, such as NHS England's integrated care system strategy. So one of the aspirations we have is to validate how 44000 and collaboration can actually be applied and integrated into the way the integrated care system strategy is rolled out. So thank you for that time. I appreciate it. And Richard, I will pass it over to you now.
Thanks, Courtney, and it's great to see that work as on about the integrated care systems, and as well as Claire Ward, I'm an NHS non-exec at an acute hospital as well, and we're going through all that at the moment. And I wish I could sit and here and talk about that, but I'm going to talk about collaboration from a provider perspective, a supplier perspective. I'm conscious I'm probably the least qualified and least interesting of the panelists today. So what I'm going to do is speak very, very briefly, say little. I'm not going to do an advertorial for the ABHI. I'm conscious that quite a few people, delegates today, will be ABHI members. I will just say that the ABHI Association of British Health Tech Industries is the largest and broadest based of the industry associations in the health tech space. Our members account for about 80% of the value of the industry, measured in terms of their sales to the NHS. We define health technology as medical devices, diagnostics and digital health technologies. What does that mean? Well, I need to get the new analogy for this because I believe the show is being cancelled, but I always used to say in the pub, it's Holby City. If you see things on Holby City, everything there is delivered through kit and technology. Even the drugs are given through kit and technology. That is what we do. We do everything an industry association you would expect to do. We're active interlocutor with government. We help our members try and understand the NHS. We help them with regulation. We help small companies scale up. We help them export. We have a home in Austin, Texas, and we have 30 companies embedded at the Dell Medical School there as a bridgehead to the US market. And we ask our members to operate inside a framework of ethical business conduct, which covers their relationship with healthcare professionals, supply chain, modern slavery, all that kind of good stuff, sustainability. Collaboration for us then, it is two things really. So Courtney mentioned the vaccine project. Well, when you had your vaccine product, it's impossible not to say that the star of any vaccine program is the vaccine, but actually I'll take a punt that you've all had your vaccine. your experience, the vaccine was a tiny part of it. It arrived in a vial, which was a medical device. It was given to you through a needle and a syringe, which are medical devices. You probably had the injection site swabbed with a surgical swab. A sterile swab. That's a medical device. The person that gave you the injection would have been dripping head to toe in PPE. So they're all medical devices. So people are in contact with medical devices all the time. But we're not medical people as an industry. We're engineers, and we engineer solutions for clinical problems, and those problems are brought to us by clinicians. So we've always had a very close collaborative relationship with clinicians in product development. And I think in the modern way of transparency, it's important those relationships are transparent, and it's important also that they're understood. Collaboration for us with the NHS is also important. We're a kind of a strange industry in that we've only got one customer, essentially. We've got one customer, which is the NHS. So it's very, very important that we do have a meaningful and productive relationship with that. And we were pleased to see the recently published Life Sciences Vision Commission, while the Prime Minister over the summer has collaboration between industry and NHS writ large through it. There are some tensions, of course. Where the rubber hits the ground, by and large, is where people are selling things. Our members are selling things to the NHS, and there are frictions there, I think, and tensions that could possibly, or certainly I'm sure, could benefit from a formal approach to collaboration, as we've heard about. So we're all taxpayers. We're all about to be bigger taxpayers to support our healthcare system. So we have to strike a balance between getting value for the taxpayer and making sure we're procuring for wider value. So one of the things I hope we've learned through the pandemic is that things like masks and gowns and gloves are not simple commodities. They're first-line infection prevention control, and you procure on price load at your peril, or more specifically the peril of the healthcare workers and the patients they're designed to protect. So I think the creation of ICSs should allow that more holistic, system-wide approach to value. And I think later on we're going to be joined on the panel by Chris Sterling, who's the interim head of the new MedTech Director in the Department of Health and Social Care, whose work programme is really coming together. And I think I'd be really interested to hear Chris's opinions on what he's heard and what that kind of a formal collaborative model look like. And one other area I would say where we might want to think of as potential conflict is around sustainability. We're waging war as a society, quite rightly, on the use of single-use plastics. But in medical applications, sometimes that is the best choice clinically, environmentally, and economically. And put on top of that all the concerns with infection prevention, then I think there's a need to think through and think about whole systems value and what are the best alternatives. So part of our bit of collaboration, we do our bit as an organisation. We've done it through a number of MOUs. We have MOUs with 4 English city regions: Leeds, in Manchester, in Birmingham, and also in Cambridge. And that is part of our role as industry association, as a kind of a catalyst or interlocutor or a broker of these relationships. And as you know, when I put people together, there'll be some sort of bilateral equivalent. And that's what happened a few years ago now, when we had an initial, one of our early meetings as a leadership group from our ABHI members and leaders from Cambridge University Health Partners. And a product of that is Paul, who's our next speaker. So at one of those interactions, there was a side discussion between Neil Mesher, who's the Chief Executive of Philips Healthcare in the UK, and Stephen Posey, who's the Chief Executive of the Royal Papworth Hospital. And from that, they got together, believe they have their own memorandum of understanding, and they're doing some really, really interesting stuff, which I think looks like true collaboration. And Paul Tadd from the Royal Papworth, whose post is jointly funded between Philips and Royal Papworth Hospital, is here now to just tell us what that actually looks like. Paul.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today as well to speak about the partnership. So I'll start with just a little about me. So I'm the Strategic Commercial Project Manager at Royal Papworth Hospital. As Richard mentioned, my post is partly funded by Philips. I started in January this year, and a significant part of my role is around managing this Royal Papworth and Philips strategic partnership, of which a large part of that is kind of the coordination and management of the joint projects that we have in place. I've been involved in partnership working in previous roles. So before this role, I'd been working in Manchester, where obviously the partnership working between the kind of public sector bodies there is kind of famously well regarded, but to have such extensive partnership working between the health sector and industry in the way that Royal Papworth and Philips have established, I believe is fairly unique. And that, I guess, was a big part of attracting me to the role, to untap some of the potential that kind of collaboration offered. Probably worth just saying a few words about each of the partners. So Royal Papworth Hospital is based at the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. It's an internationally leading hospital specialising in expert care and the treatment of complex cardiothoracic conditions. It's the UK's largest and leading specialist in cardiothoracic care. It's the UK's main heart and lung transplant centre. The hospital delivers some of the best surgical outcomes in the world for cardiac surgery and transplantation services. It's a founding member of Cambridge University Health Partners, and it's also home to the UK's largest respiratory support and sleep centre. I'm sure you'll all be familiar with Philips, but I'll say a few words about Philips as well. So they were founded in 1891, originally as a company that produced lamps, and have since transformed into a leading healthcare company. They're a leader in diagnostic imaging systems, healthcare innovation technology solutions, patient monitoring, cardiac devices and services, transformational consultancy services, and home healthcare solutions. So there's a great synergy between the two organisations, and I think particularly in their kind of values and objectives. So the kind of Philips purpose is very much around improving people's health and well-being through meaningful innovation, and they currently have over 1,200 people working in research innovation in the UK and Europe. So as Richard's already described, the beginning of the partnership was somewhat facilitated by Richard and ABHI. I understand there was a meeting and dinner in kind of May 2017, and so it's good for me to be able to repay the favour and talk a little bit about the partnership today. In early 2018, there was a 2-day co-create session between Royal Papworth and Philips at their innovation centre, and an MOU was signed soon after, so kind of early to mid 2018. A lot of change happened in that time, not least with the pandemic, but also Royal Papworth Hospital moved sites. But it was also recognised that dedicated resource would be needed to fully kind of deliver the ambitions of the partnership, and so this jointly managed project management office was established at the end of 2020, and this office, this PMO, and my role has greatly strengthened kind of project management practices, and has helped improve the oversight of the whole portfolio. So it's helped both partners to become more responsive to the needs of the others. I'll talk very briefly about the projects that we've been working on and collaborating on together. So we have kind of 11 active projects currently. That was cut fairly recently after a bit of a project review and trying to make sure that the partnership is focused on kind of the priorities of each area. And they range from kind of a number of kind of joint research projects that have been established between the two partners, trialing cutting edge technologies, to more strategic projects. So particularly in the last few months, following kind of the most recent wave of the pandemic, looking at how, as a partnership, we can tackle patient waiting lists together, or looking at the diagnostic capacity within the kind of wider Cambridgeshire and Peterborough geography, and as two partners bringing kind of different skills and knowledge and expertise, what can we achieve in those spaces? I'd say one of our biggest successes to date has been some work that we've done together, optimizing the hospital's cath labs. So Philips adapted and strengthened much of the connectivity between the different systems and the hospital patient management software, and that's helped to advance clinician experience and workflow. So that's kind of often one of the big successes we point to, but it's seen a real world difference to the hospital's efficiency, and pre-COVID-19 facilitated a near doubling of elective and emergency cases from 2019. So big success there. Just going to talk very briefly about why I think the partnership works. So I was giving this some thought the other day, and I think for me a key element of this is the strong alignment. Excuse me, the strong alignment and values between the two organisations. We're a good fit. So both organisations have a really strong focus on collaboration and innovation. I think equally, and something that's developed over time, is the understanding of the other's priorities and motivations, and I think recognising that there are a lot of win-wins to be had on a number of the projects that we're working on together. But I guess the nature of any partnership is that there's always an element of kind of give and take, and I believe two partners have achieved a good balance. I think what's been absolutely vital to the strength of the partnership is the level of senior engagement. So as described, the partnership was established by the two CEOs meeting, Stephen Posey and Neil Mesher, and they have a very strong relationship in terms of have regular kind of weekly meetings where they catch up, and it might be that they're discussing specific projects, but it might be that they're just discussing kind of other factors in the kind of health system, and this regular discussion and regular keeping contact has helped build and strengthen those relationships, and it's been replicated within the working group that I'm part of. So equally have weekly relationships that helps to instill that sense of partnership, but also I think that regular contact and that real commitment to the partnership has paid dividends in terms of helping to progress projects, helping to work through more difficult conversations, and yes, I think that was all I was going to say on that one. Since secondly, kind of openness, honesty, and trust. So built the relationship over a period of time now. I guess this is the third year of the partnership, and we're able to have those difficult discussions. Able to be, honest. I believe early on, Phillips described wanting to be. They described it as constructively invasive, but I think that's actually a really good way of putting it. It's an approach that kind of encompasses kind of curiosity, honesty, and innovation, and this sense that to be good partners is not always about being nice to each other, although on the whole working relationships are very good. It is about that honesty and being able to have those very open and frank discussions, and I do believe these attributes have been central to collaboration success. So I think that's a real strength and something that's been really facilitated by how regularly both the chief execs but also the kind of project steering group meet. I think particularly in the last few months, the strength of some of the project management practices have really helped, making sure there's kind of clear governance, making sure there's good, strong reporting, that things are signed off by both partners, and I think that's become a real strength of the partnership and something that took a little while to develop to make sure that that all decisions were made jointly and kind of went through the appropriate processes on both sides. I think the partnership is really strong performance evaluation and continual improvement focus, and I think that's another area where it really helps us to build on the partnership and build on the successes that we've had, and I'm aware that that's another focus of the collaboration standard that was discussed earlier. So I think I'll leave it there for now, but I think it's great to see all the things the partnership has achieved, and I'm really excited about what it will achieve next. I'm not sure who I'm handing over to.
Brilliant.
So,
thank you very much, Paul. Thank you so much.
So
I'm pleased to now introduce Dr. Andrew Dixon, who is from SVGC Consulting and is the ICW lead for SME Specialist Interest Group. So now over to you, Andrew.
Thanks so much. So yeah, it's great to be here and come from a different sector and share some of the kind of sector experience. As you've just heard, I chair the Small Business SIG, so we're going to talk a little bit about small businesses in a minute. I'm also the vice chair for the Defence and Security Small Business Forum, and we're going to talk about the MOD and Tech UK on these slides. Next slide. Can we move? Thank you. So Claire particularly wanted me to talk about what the MOD have been doing. I spend a lot of time with MOD and their work with Tech UK, which is a trade association. And importantly, the Ministry of Defence has put in place this document. You can see this code of practice for collaboration. Now, the purpose of this was really to try and shift the nature of the relationships that the MOD has, and particularly this particular bit of MOD called Strategic Command, with its supply chain, both large and small businesses. It's all about changing behaviour, trying to improve visibility, so sharing, engaging differently, discussing things in a different way, changing the style of language, talking first, and really focusing on that kind of behavioural shift. And it's been really, really effective as a mechanism with a lot of support and signatories, which I'll show on the next slide. So if you can move forward one, thank you. So one of the really important factors as to why this has been successful is because of this. So I happen to come from SVGC, but as you'll see on the left-hand side, there's some very senior Crown servants and members of the Ministry of Defence have signed this code of practice for collaboration. There's a whole bunch of businesses that have signed up to this as well. And because this list is published, it's very apparent who is being supportive of this. And I should say, having worked with a lot of these organisations, they take it very seriously. They don't just sign up to this stuff and do nothing. And it's really shifting the nature of the relationship that's gone on for a long time with the MOD. I've put a link on the slide to the list if anybody's interested. Next slide, please. So why is this really important? Well, historically, there's been a really adversarial relationship between the MOD and a lot of its suppliers. Not always the case, but certainly there quite often, and a real desire to shift this, and particularly the commercial director and Defence Digital, Lee Rimmer, wanted to kind of change that. The National Audit Office have reported that strong collaborative relationships certainly go hand in hand with good project performance. So part of this was about responding to the NAO's challenge around the MOD's ability to deliver its projects, and making sure that the things like measuring relationships, which is a core part of the standard, which then allow you both to get effective working, but also to have continuous improvement of the relationship. Next slide. So why has this helped MOD, and obviously translate this into your own sector? Really importantly, the standard, and there's now a series of standards we'll talk about in a second, don't enforce a single fixed approach. It's about the relationship, it's about flexibility and agility, it's about working together. It involves looking at both sides of the relationship, but it's not a fixed approach. So that's been really beneficial to shift the purely transactional relationships the MOD's had in the past. It enables a different approach to incentivization, to innovation, to enable skills to be transferred much more effectively, because it's not them and us, it is a set of joint outcomes and objectives. And one of the standards we're going to talk about in a second, 44003, has now opened that up further with smaller businesses to engage differently in a fundamentally different way with the MOD than they have previously. Okay, next slide. So that's benefits for the MOD, but what about the suppliers? Well, if they know that there's a more collaborative relationship and more is being shared, then they're able to invest sensibly and wisely in the right choices of development. And in a constrained market like the NHS, the MOD is the same, where a lot of the investment kind of needs to know that it's going to be procured, and therefore opening up and sharing in that way is really, really vital to get that small amount of investment that's possible in the private sector to be focused in the right way. It avoids wasted effort. It means that you can get that open and honest responses. That allows improved innovation, long-term performance, and so that from an industrial perspective, it's more focused and achieving better outcomes for the MOD. So everybody wins in this process. Okay, next slide. And of course, there's joint benefits between MOD and the supply chain as well. We've kind of covered most of this already. Just to touch on a few, that transparency, so that word trust has cropped up a few times in this conversation already today. It is fundamental. Transparency is enabled by collaboration. Transparency enables trust. Trust enables longer term, better relationships, delivering kind of better outcomes. So there's a kind of cascade that happens with collaboration. And one at the bottom about issue management. So if you're being more open and you're sharing more, you don't have to wait until things become a crisis before they're solved. You kind of know about them up front, and collaboration often stops the crisis from happening that you would have had in a normal kind of procurement environment. And I know there's been a question about crisis that we'll come back to later. Okay, next slide. So slight shift for a moment. I mentioned 44003 a second ago. So these standards are being introduced. These are kind of guidance documents for helping, in 44003's case, small businesses, so mumsies, micro, small and medium-sized enterprises, to use the principles of collaborative business relationships within the 44000 framework to help them to work with larger organisations. That was released earlier this year, July, I think, and 44004 is due out later this year, and that does the opposite. So that's about helping large organisations to adjust and work more closely with mumsies, with micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. So these are all part of the family now, and are really helping those larger organisations to set up collaborative business relationships. We have one ourselves directly with a public sector organisation, with the FCDO, and that's direct small business, and it's built around the foundations of 44003. So it is possible, it can be done. We're a precedent that proves the case. Next slide. So one of the things the ICW's been doing, as you've heard some examples of recently, is conducting kind of questionnaires and research. This is just very briefly an example with some quotes at the bottom from industry about why collaboration between large and small businesses is really important. You'll see topics in there about expanding services. It's fundamental to the success of projects. It creates innovation. We wouldn't understand our specialist operations. Our clients need that small business connection. And they viewing this as being an extremely important aspect of their business going forward. There's a lot more behind this. Unfortunately, I don't have time today to go into it. Next slide. So coming back to 44003 for a minute, one of the things that's recognised by the ICW is the fact that not every small business is going to want to invest in or try and achieve the full standard of 44001, and that's where 44003 helps as well. So this concept of a staircase is being introduced at the moment. There's a number of large organisations that are trialling this with their small business supply chains, and it's something that would work more broadly in other organisations like your own, where you can take the first step. You can evaluate your own business operation against the 12 principles of 44003. Start to look at, how do I get that externally confirmed, either by those large organisations or by the ICW. At that point, those small businesses have got a statement that says, I am working collaboratively, which is really helpful when they come to procurement and responding to tenders, etc. They may then want to carry on, assess themselves against the full standard, see where they get to, decide whether they want to continue up the staircase. But what's been introduced is a recognition that we want all businesses to work within the 44000 family, and it's not just a one-stop shop. There are a series of ways that businesses can engage that are appropriate to themselves. Next slide. So that's my final kind of introduction. What I wanted to do is just to kind of wrap up with a recognition that you can consider yourselves in terms of such a framework and your own collaboration kind of structure. Like the MOD's done, the MOD and Tech UK have introduced this mechanism. It's had significant benefit. And what I want to do is, I guess, just leave with a challenge to think about whether or not that would be appropriate for your own organisations to set up a similar sort of structure and framework. And happy to take questions. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. So before we move on to the Q&A panel discussion, I would just like to introduce Chris Sterling, who has joined us today from DHSC, if I can get that right, and he's a Director of Medical Technology at the company. So welcome to you, Chris. And you've all come on camera, so fantastic. So we have had a couple of questions come in. So we'll try our best to answer them all. If not, after the webinar today, we'll try and answer them directly to you. So if I go straight to the first question then, so how can we emulate the kind of collaboration we witnessed during the pandemic? Do we need a crisis to make it work? So I don't know if Andrew, if you're able to answer that question for us today.
Yeah, happy to pick that one up. I mean, the answer is no. You don't need a crisis. I think for me, what the pandemic has shown and what a crisis shows is that's when you need the agility and flexibility that a crisis kind of requires to be resolved. So the collaboration kind of behaviours and skills just come to the fore. As I mentioned in my presentation earlier, actually, if you're operating collaboratively in the first place, sure, you can't stop a pandemic, but you can stop an awful lot of crises from happening in the first place. And we've seen that all over the place. That the MOD relationship that I gave an example of before stops a large number of potential procurement crises from happening. So using that same practice that's come out through the pandemic, and maybe that's a good thing to come out of it, is people recognizing that working differently, working with agility and flexibility and openness and sharing and supporting each other, and all of the principles that sit behind collaboration is something that you can apply in any other situation as well.
Perhaps if I can come in as well. I mean, one of the things that we noticed from our members during the pandemic is that those who had built really good relationships across their supply chains were those who were able to adapt and be flexible much faster than those who we think, hadn't had the extent of relationships. So it's certainly something that has given members that we've talked to an opportunity to reflect on the relationships that they've built and what else they've learned during the pandemic. So I certainly would agree with Andrew on that. I suppose one of the issues is to be really interested to understand from Chris's point of view at the Department of Health and Social Care, whether or not the lessons that have been learnt through COVID and pandemic across that supply chain are things that they can build into better relationships in the future.
I think, thanks, Claire. I think clearly there are things that we can build in. I think the biggest challenge between the sort of crisis and non-crisis environment is that I think through COVID we saw sort of unprecedented cooperation and collaboration between people who normally regard themselves as competitors. And I think as we move out of that crisis mode, there's a real challenge for some of those industry organisations to keep that sort of collaborative mindset with organisations that they tend to regard as competition. So I think that's a key point. However, I think we're always in some degree of crisis. It's the scale of that is different. And so whether we're talking about an environmental sustainability crisis or a funding crisis or a patient backlog in the NHS, I think the challenge for us as system leaders is to coalesce industry, clinicians and patients around those challenges, as opposed to seeing this as a collaboration between one supplier and one trust. But that's a great place to start. But I'm very taken by some of the examples, particularly the vaccine given earlier. It's far more broader in its application.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Chris. We'll move on to the next question then. So we have here, what advantages would result from standardization of collaboration frameworks? Courtney, are you okay to answer that one?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'll draw a comparison to initiate the kind of answer of the question. So if you think about other areas where businesses focus or businesses engage together, they don't do it ad hoc or informally. If you were trying to manage quality with a supplier, you were trying to manage quality with a partner organization, you wouldn't do it on a handshake and maybe something written on the back of a bar napkin. You wouldn't do that. You would do it in a much more formal, constructive, standardized way to make sure that quality is set objectives, you have the people responsible, you've trained the individuals, and you're measuring the success. And I think collaboration could be applied in that same context of why would you attempt to collaborate, this very broad word, like quality is a very broad word, why would you attempt to collaborate and a mechanism that is informal and handshake driven instead of based on a standardized, universally, internationally accepted management system that allows you to set yourself up for success in a more formal, standardized way based on a management system, and linking it to some of your other governance principles that you have potentially within your business. So for me, collaboration, the only way to do it successfully and to be able to measure the results or the output of that collaboration is to do it when it's governed by a management system or in line with 44,000 principles. So I just draw that comparison all the time for organizations. You can manage health and safety ad hocly, or you can manage it formally. Which one do you think is going to drive the better result? Same with collaboration. You can manage it informally, or you can manage it formally through standards. What do you think is going to drive the better result?
Just to add to that, if that's okay, just for a second, Courtney. So what drove me and ourselves down this particular road was we had lots of informal relationships, and quite often, if there was a difficulty in them, you'd end up in a conversation where you said, well, actually, we haven't defined what we were trying to achieve from this relationship. And of course, the standards just causes you to say, well, what do we want from this? How far are we going to do? What are we going to share? What working practices are we going to have together? And it causes you, if nothing else, to ask those questions, which immediately sets the relationship on far more solid ground than it would be without. And at its simplest level, that's what the standard does. And for me, it's great.
Brilliant. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. This one is a bit of a mouthful, so you'll have to bear with me. So collaboration is great for development, but regulatory capacity is critical to actually getting a product approved. How can capacity be created in the system to see collaborative projects brought to market? So i.e. we're not having to rely on direct MHRA intervention during a pandemic to speed the process up. So Courtney, another one for you maybe?
Yeah, I'm sure, and welcome other colleagues. Chris, I'd welcome your input. I was obviously kind of government focused there, but one of the things I would say is if you're able to establish an objective with another organization, whether that's a supplier or a partner organization through formal collaboration, you can approach the regulator with much more mass in how you seek to gain new ways of working. And I think the more you can approach as a community or as an ecosystem to drive change and engage regulation or the regulator as a part of that process and as a part of the collaboration formally, you're going to, again, have the right to find objectives. You're going to have a very clear output that you're looking to achieve. And the regulators bought in because you've collaborated with them rather than trying to do things under the radar and then bringing it to them last minute and expecting them to just shake all their different timelines up because you have a good idea. So I think power in masses, power in formal communication, and involving the regulator in that formal collaboration. But Chris, I'd welcome your input as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I would just put some examples on that. I would also sort of observe that compared to a lot of regulators, MHRA has approved certainly the vaccines more speedily than most competent authorities, which I think is the technical term. We have also had, approvals for new regulatory devices done in a matter of days at times, and I don't believe. Sorry, part of my role was responsible for the UK's pandemic response for medical devices and oxygen and ventilators. And we did not have a single situation through that where we had something that we wanted to use, but we were not able to for a regulatory reason. To go back to Courtney's point about buying MHRA in from the start, I mean, I remember when we launched the Prime Minister's Ventilation Challenge on a Friday, and we were having sessions with MHRA on the Saturday, and Duncan and the team were involved in that, literally from day one, and it just really wasn't an issue. I think the challenge for suppliers is building that level of critical mass and engagement, because where you have a nationally sponsored programme of that magnitude, it's very easy to get that buy-in. And I think this is where, I know at the moment the current regulatory regime is very much focused around individual approvals. I think looking forward, we need to look more to sort of class-based and standard-based approvals for things as a mechanism of gaining approval for types of products, which I guess would help speed things up. Clearly, MHRA could always use more capacity, but I think that's probably true for most organisations, both in the private and public sector. So whilst there's more they can do, I think generally we should be seeing that as one of the more successful collaborative aspects of our regulatory experience over the last 2 years or so.
Brilliant. Thank you for your input, both. So the next question, I think, Andrew, this one is for you, given your background. So many of those companies in health tech are SME. Where would you advise prioritizing investment in skills to support collaborative working?
Yeah, sure. That's a really, really good question. In terms of skills, I'd probably go for kind of those associated with the behaviours we talked about. So behaviours is just really important, particularly communication skills, and listening skills. And if you wanted to go further down than that, in behavioural analysis terms, kind of building behaviours. So that's as opposed to blocking behaviours, if you see what I mean by the difference. So making sure that you've got people in your organisation who are able to kind of listen effectively and grow ideas together. Those are the kind of really core skills. We also use a set of linking skills, a part of something called TMSDI, which is just a behavioural model, and the linking skills fit really, really well, we found, with collaborative practices in organisations that we deal with. So to kick things off, that's probably the skill set that I'd focus on most.
Okay, great, thank you. So another question we have is, what appetite do you see from NHS procurement teams to work differently and more collaboratively across the supply chain? Paul and Richard, I don't know if you wanted to sort of shed some light on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a lot. Before I do that, I should. We talked about crisis before, and do we need a crisis and all this. I really think we ought to acknowledge, in the middle of that pandemic, when it was going absolutely crazy, it was a pretty interesting place to be, and Chris was absolutely up to his ears in it. And the fact remains, we didn't run out of stuff in the NHS, and that is down to not just the extraordinary efforts of suppliers, but also the work of Chris and colleagues who really did put in an incredible shift for a very long period of time. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. Yeah, answer to your question is, like a lot of things, it's patchy. Some are better than others. I think certainly for clinical stuff, those where there's been clinical engagement, end user engagement, that cuts off any problems with, whether it's very high tech equipment or, things that may not seem quite as technological, but if you suddenly impose a new set of gloves on a set of surgeons, that's likely to cause problems. Because believe me, if you're under the knife this afternoon, you absolutely want to be sure the surgeon's happy with the gloves he's working on. So that clinical engagement in early stage will head off any problems. And also leadership as well. We can talk about value, and Chris gets it, I get it. You talk about top of the shop, Stephen Posey at RPH, or Amanda Pritchard at NHS. You'll get this value thing, but when the road hits the rubber, it's an interaction usually much further down the sort of hierarchy, and people you're dealing with are under a different set of levers and incentives. So some good leadership about what value looks like, and empowering people locally, rather than pushing too hard on very sort of transactional short-term targets, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to Richard's response. I think that's spot on in terms of, I think it's a mixed picture, and I think that leadership is just so important to making that happen.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I think just looking at the time and just making sure that everyone gets their lunch in as well, we'll wrap it here. So I'd just like to thank all of our speakers today. Thank you so much for your time, your input, and sharing your expertise with our audience today. And I hope those that have listened in today found this useful, and thank you for joining us. Just a reminder, after this webinar is closed, we will share a copy of the recording of the webinar with the slides and some supporting resources, so do look out for that. But for now, I will take your leave. So thank you very much again, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.